Any serious toy collector knows how cautious you have to be when purchasing certain action figures, because inevitably you need to get their counterparts, their arch rivals, their foils. So if you get Batman, you're gonna have to get the Joker eventually. If you have Superman, your Lex Luthor purchase is not far behind. If you have Optimus, definitely Megatron is lurking right around the corner. That's just the way it works. And so following this logic, you would think that if you get He-Man, you need to have Skeletor. Well, this might not be the case, because upon closer inspection, not only is Skeletor not on He-Man's level, he might just be one of the least compelling and most pathetic supervillains ever created for a beloved IP. Having said that, I'm going to get this action figure here. It's a relatively expensive Ultimates Super7 Masters of the Universe Skeletor action figure. Rip open this really cool packaging and place him right where he belongs. Not as a fancy collectible, but as He-Man's true arch nemesis. Even though he doesn't deserve to share the same shelf space. And I'll explain why. When it came to these Masters of the Universe action figures, in particular the previous versions of the Super 7s, namely the Mattel Filmation 2.0 action figures, I wasn't going to pay what some sellers were asking for on eBay to get these toys mint in box. But now that I got into toy photography and also doing this channel, I decided that was all the excuse I needed to go out and finally get these toys. After doing some research, I opted for the Super 7 versions of the characters because they came with more accessories. Apparently they had fixed some of the engineering issues that the previous Mattel versions suffered from. And that's something that I can personally attest to. I was able to find a good deal on a loose Ultimates Super 7 He-Man. I'm happy to report that the copy that I got arrived in pristine condition, good as new. The joints are tight, the plastic looks new. He recalls the He-Man action figures that I used to play with as a kid, but at the same time he has that animation sculpt, which is the primary reason why I got this action figure. He's just a really cool looking toy. He is a bit waxy looking, but Super 7 did a really good job at capturing that animation aesthetic. So brimming with confidence, I felt brave enough to go out there and get Skeletor. He's not as expensive as He-Man in this line. So much so that I was able to get him in the box, which might have been a mistake. All due respect to the Filmation 2.0 packaging, which I think is classic. As soon as I saw the Super 7's packaging, it sent me way back to the 80s, shopping at Toys R Us right before Christmas, still believing in Santa Claus, and that Santa Claus somehow would pick up your toys from layaway and then drop them off at your home on Christmas Eve, and your mom using that against you to keep you in line at least for a few weeks. Like I said, I'm a sucker for these retro blister cards every time. I specifically own some action figures specifically for that reason. The question then is this Skeletor one of those figures? And it has less to do with the enduring appeal of these sorts of action figures as mint in box collectibles, as much as it has to do with Skeletor being a bit of a joke these days. But to be even more honest with you, he might not even be the source of the problem. Instead, it's this guy right here. He-Man, at least the He-Man from the cartoons, which, by the way, is not the same He-Man from the Classics line of action figures. Those toys are based on the original Masters of the Universe action figures that came out in the 80s, which it turns out get their mythology from those little mini comic books that used to come with those toys. There's a lot of good stuff out there covering all of this, breaking it down in detail. See, I totally recommend you go out there and watch that after watching my video, of course. The He-Man from the little mini comics skews more towards Conan the Barbarian, whereas the cartoon version, he has more in common with Superman, it turns out. Not too long ago, I sat down to watch some old He-Man cartoons with my little nephew, who was right around the same age that I was when I first started watching the cartoons. My plan was to get him into He-Man action figures, so I bought him some of those retro He-Man toys that you can find in Target right now. But I knew that if my nephew was going to look forward to getting more He-Man figures, he was going to have to form a bond with the character, the same way that I did. Everything was going according to plan. My nephew was just riveted by these cartoons. Myself, however, well, I was riveted too, but for slightly different reasons. Now, in case you haven't seen a He-Man cartoon recently, let me get you up to speed. To begin with, I forgot just how campy these cartoons were, and really just how flat out bonkers they were. Case in point, our protagonist, He-Man. To begin with, He-Man is way more powerful than I remembered him. I mean, Superman level powerful. In fact, he might be even more powerful than Superman. I mean, even Superman has been known to break a sweat every now and then, right? But He-Man? The more I'm watching this stuff, the crazier the stuff that He-Man was starting to do. It truly got to the point of parody. To my growing chagrin, it was starting to seem like He-Man was embodying one of the worst, most offensive TV tropes out there. The Marty Stu, which of course is the male version of the Mary Sue. Briefly stated, a Marty Stu is a character who can do pretty much anything that the plot requires of him. Marty Stu was comically strong, super strong, obscenely intelligent, dashing. I guess you can say he's Luke Skywalker, the Karate Kid, Sherlock Holmes, and Neo from The Matrix, all rolled up into one big ball of bad storytelling. In the sense that without any real conflict, you don't have drama, right? So in light of this kind of adversary, there's really no way that poor Skeletor would be able to function as a compelling, in the true sense of the term, arch nemesis for He-Man. Though Skeletor's plans in the cartoon ostensibly involved trying to harness the powers of Castle Grayskull, to then take over Eternia. From what I saw, and I didn't see the entire season, mind you, but I saw enough, alright, to understand that Skeletor seems to be more invested in simply trying to get the better of He-Man than to take over Eternia, which would probably make Skeletor, as my friend pointed out, one of the biggest haters on record, next to maybe Gargamel.
I have you now, you muscle-bound oaf!
And his minions? I remember being afraid of Beastman and of Trapjaw when I was a kid, but watching them as an adult in these weird-ass cartoons, I was shocked. I mean, they're depicted as utter morons, buffoons, completely inept. Skeletor spent most of the episodes that I saw berating them. I didn't realize how subversive it actually was. I didn't realize that the He-Man cartoon was a comedy.
Furry, flea-bitten fool, I'll cover my throne with your hide!
I mean, it's almost endearing just how often Skeletor fails. That seems to be what the entire show is about. Which is to say that as a supervillain, he probably doesn't belong on the same shelf as He-Man. In fact, the more you watch, the more you realize that Skeletor might not even be that bad of a guy at all.
Oh, blast it! I don't know what's coming over me.
as a toy collector, you're probably better served going out of universe and going through your collection of 7-inch action figures if you're really trying to find a proper arch nemesis for He-Man.
I surround myself with fools!
Skeletor might have a point at that. Fun, intriguing possibilities aside, truth is, no one outside of maybe the Galactus HasLab or He-Man himself deserves to share shelf space with the mighty He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. No kidding. So with Skeletor's status as possibly, as it turns out, the most pathetic supervillain ever created, and a beloved IP like Masters of the Universe He-Man's fault? Is He-Man, then, a literary black hole? I mean, I can kind of see why Skeletor moonlights these days as a very, very blue meme on Facebook instead of one of the coolest blue supervillains ever created. The truth is that He-Man's not that bad of a guy himself either.
He-Man, are you alright?
Just must my
Throughout the proceedings, He-Man was earnest, kind, he was secure in himself, never ironic, though he could be silly and break the fourth wall sometimes. He's actually kind of cool, like that frat boy or that jock that you could actually hang out with occasionally and crack stupid jokes with.
How original! Flower power!
He kind of reminds me of Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman in that sense. Morrison's conceit, for those that are not familiar with that miniseries, is that Superman, essentially being a god, can't help but be anything but chill. That actually resonates because it speaks more to Superman's superhuman ability to be a good person inside rather than to his external godlike powers, which enables him to literally move planets around. If you're looking for true science fiction, well, there it is. And this to me is ultimately the same vibe I get from He-Man from the cartoons. It's actually what redeems the character for me and my precious childhood memories. So even though it's He-Man who's at the center of all of these shenanigans, it's also He-Man who lends the proceedings some level of dignity. I mean, he's the only one who seems to take Skeletor as a legitimate threat, drawing him back into the story and giving him another crack at Castle Grayskull's all-powerful secrets.
He-Man, you're a fool! You know I wouldn't have saved you!
I guess I value life more than you do, Skeletor, even yours.
So to answer the question that I posed at the beginning of this video, does Skeletor belong on the shelf next to He-Man? Well, the answer is Skeletor would be completely lost without He-Man. He-Man's the only one who's taking him seriously, and if He-Man's taking him seriously, I will too. In retrospect, are the He-Man cartoons deserving of some retrospective literary laurels? Are these cartoons a primer on dramatic storytelling? I would say definitely not. But at the same time, the cartoon is a lot more subversive and sophisticated than I remembered it, and I'm able to enjoy it in different ways as an adult. But more importantly, as long as little 5-year-olds are captivated by the proceedings, well, I'm good with that. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you stick around for more.